Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Sacrifice of Angels, which is episode 6 of season 6 of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. This video is a part of a series of videos I'm doing where I review episodes of Star Trek as requested by my viewers. This review was requested by Surplus Gadvids. Sacrifice of Angels is the episode that concludes the 6-episode story arc about the Dominion takeover of the station. Sacrifice of Angels begins with Sisko preparing to lead a massive fleet of Starfleet ships against a Dominion Cardassian fleet in order to get Deep Space Nine back and retake the station before the Dominion is able to take down the minefield. With help of the last-minute arrivals of a Klingon fleet to join the battle, the Defiant and only the Defiant makes it through the battle lines and sets a course for Deep Space Nine. Meanwhile, on the station, Kira and her supporters try to come up with a plan to sabotage the station's weapons to prevent the Dominion from taking down the minefield, and encounter a setback when they're all thrown in a holding cell, and receive some unexpected help when Quark busts them out of the cell. Kira and Ram succeed in sabotaging the station's weapons, but not before they manage to take down the minefield. The Defiant arrives at the station just in time to see the minefield come down. In a last desperate move, Sisko takes the Defiant inside the wormhole to take on the Dominion fleet. There, he has a chat with the wormhole aliens, or prophets, and convinces them to intervene on their behalf, and they simply make the Dominion fleet disappear. The Defiant returns to Deep Space Nine, where a joint Starfleet-Klingon fleet is on its way, so the Dominion and Cardassian forces are forced to evacuate the station and retreat back into Cardassian space. However, Ducat goes a bit mad after his daughter is killed and is left behind as Sisko and crew retake Deep Space Nine and are reunited with all those they left behind. So, late 1996 to mid-1997 saw a noticeable drop in quality in Star Trek, which at the time was the 5th season of Star Trek Deep Space Nine and the 3rd season of Star Trek Voyager. I'm not sure exactly what was going on with them, but both for this year, both shows saw a massive drop in quality and storytelling. However, both of these seasons ended with the show starting to rebuild itself out of this rut and having a great setup for the following season. And late 1997 saw a return to form for both shows, as Voyager introduced Seven of Nine in the Borg storyline and became a much more interesting show, and Deep Space Nine introduced the Dominion War story arc, which made the show much more interesting and exciting. I don't know what it was, but this year the Star Trek producers noticed the quality had dropped and really got their shit together and managed to produce 2 seasons that were some of the best seasons of their respective shows. Deep Space Nine left with a cliffhanger at the end of Season 5 where a joint Dominion Cardassian fleet took over Deep Space Nine, with some characters like Kira, Odo, and Quark left behind, while Sisko and the other Starfleet officers were forced to flee on the Defiant. And so the start of Season 6 of Deep Space Nine, the producers boldly decided to do a first in Star Trek history. Rather than simply resolve the situation in one episode or two-parter, they did a 6-episode story arc that showed Sisko and Defiant in a state of war and Kira and the others trapped behind enemy lines with the Dominion in control of the station. And this experiment was a resounding success. It was exactly the shot in the arm Deep Space Nine needed, as we got to see more dynamic villains like Gul Dukat and Weyoun, and saw Kira and Odo's relationship fall apart as they were forced to live under Dominion rule. Sacrifice of Angels was an incredible and exciting, satisfying way to end the story arc and to finally bring Sisko and the others back to Deep Space Nine. I remember when the 5th season finale, Call to Arms, aired, my friends and I were so super excited about seeing this huge Starfleet and Klingon fleet just flying by. Just seeing these fleets that were so huge on screen was a first in Star Trek. But in this episode, we actually got to see those fleets in action attacking a Cardassian Dominion fleet, and it was super exciting. Yes, it does kind of go against Roddenberry's vision of Star Trek as a perfect future, but it's so exciting, who cares? I heard some complaints that these battle sequences were disappointing as it was too much like Star Wars and starships were destroyed much easier than what has been established on Star Trek, but I strongly disagree. As if you watch carefully, they didn't just explode because one torpedo hit, they exploded so quickly because they were being fired upon by multiple ships at the same time, which makes perfect sense in Star Trek continuity. We simply never saw so many ships destroyed so quickly because we've never seen a space battle on such a massive scale before, and that changed everything, and it was pulled off really well. But overall, I found the storyline with Kira and Odo in the station far more interesting during the station takeover story arc, as this had a lot more interesting character dilemmas, as the Starfleet storyline was pretty much just a straightforward war storyline where the characters all seemed kind of bland. Whereas on the station, tensions were high as Kira and the others were forced to live under occupation. In fact, I think it's fair to say that Ronald D. Moore, who helped create this story arc, drew inspiration from these episodes when he did a similar story arc at the start of Season 3 on Battlestar Galactica, where the Cylons took over New Caprica and the humans were forced to live under occupation, and I dare say they actually did a better job here with Deep Space Nine. This episode in particular is where everything came to a head, where Odo, who had earlier abandoned Kira and all his friends for the comfort of the Great Link, realized what was really important in his life, and he decided to help Kira and abandon the female changeling. I found this story arc played out nicely as they played Odo, who just became apathetic to everything outside the link, but in this episode, a reality started to sink in, and the gravity of what he was responsible for and what he did to his friends really affected him and was weighing on it, and snapped him out of it and brought him back to helping Kira and the Federation. Plus, this is a Deep Space Nine first, as Quark ends up doing something heroic and actually busting Kira and the others out of jail, and does so by shooting two Jem'Hadar soldiers.
Nobody moves except you. Now, open the cells.
During the whole station takeover story arc, Quark was skirting this line, trying not to take sides as his brother and his friends were deep into trying to sabotage his Dominion. In this episode, things came to a head where he had to decide, and for once did something born out of true heroism rather than profit, so a big step for him. Another character that this episode was huge for was Gul Dukat. When the Cardassians joined the Dominion in the previous season, Dukat became an important villain again for Deep Space Nine, which I think was a great move on the showrunner's part, as Ducat is one of the best villains in all of Star Trek. And this episode is huge for him as he basically loses his mind, and for the rest of the series he's played as a madman bent on destruction, and his megalomania reaches new heights.
Victory was within our grasp.
We have to evacuate the station, sir.
Bajor, the Federation, the Alpha Quadrant, all lost.
And it began here with a very convincing story with his daughter that was built up to nicely, as he was shown as sort of obsessive over his daughter, and it makes sense that Damar, the ever-loyal sidekick, would kill Zial after learning she was involved in sabotaging the station, and that death would push Ducat over the edge because he partially blamed himself, which was a nice touch. And the whole way that the episode was edited worked really well, as it jumped quickly from scene to scene. Right when Kira was trying to sabotage the station while Ducat and Weyoun were preparing for the Dominion reinforcements to come through the wormhole, and Cisco was, going to the station on the Defiant, trying to rush there to get there in time. So it was really, all this intercut really well, and it really added to the excitement of the story. However, one of the problems I had with the whole Dominion War story arc was the nonchalant way they treated Deep Space Nine, as it was at the mouth of the wormhole, and if the Dominion took down the minefield guarding the wormhole, that would mean they'd be able to bring in a ridiculous amount of reinforcements that would automatically win the war for them. So that makes Deep Space Nine the most important real estate in the entire war by far. Because if there's no minefield, then the war's over. That's it. It's done. Everything else pales into comparison. It's a bit ridiculous. Sisko had to even argue with the Starfleet admirals about this, and War from Martok had to convince Gowron about this, as it was the single location. If you don't have control of it, it means you automatically lose the war. I mean, come on. In fact, Starfleet should have never left Deep Space Nine in the first place. As in A Call to Arms, they lost Deep Space Nine because the Federation and Klingon forces were too busy attacking Dominion shipping yards, and Sisko was acting like, oh, they have more important things to do than to protect Deep Space Nine. But then several months later, when Season 6 started, they were losing the war, so I guess attacking the shipping yards was pretty useless then. So they forfeited the one location that could instantly cost them the war for something that ultimately was insignificant. I understand why all this was done for plot convenience, because they wanted to do a Dominion station takeover arc, and they wanted to have the Dominion win the war, or be winning the war, in order to raise the stakes and give our heroes a bigger obstacle to overcome. But ultimately, it's sloppy writing because it actually makes no sense and does not fit together. So now let me address Deus Ex Machina, as that is one of the biggest accusations leveled at this episode, that it employs this flimsy plot device. This is how Wikipedia defines Deus Ex Machina. It is a Greek term meaning God from the machine. The term has evolved to mean a plot device whereby a seemingly unsolvable problem is suddenly and abruptly resolved by the contrived and unexpected intervention of some new event, character, ability, or object. Depending on how it is done, it can be intended to move the story forward when the writer has painted himself into a corner and sees no other way out to surprise the audience to bring the tale to a happy ending. This term was used to describe Greek plays where the plot was resolved by gods intervening and setting things right so the hero triumphs. Use of Deus Ex Machina is generally looked on as very sloppy writing and employed when a writer isn't creative enough to come up with a reasonable and realistic way to resolve the situation, and thus uses a easy, quick fix. So you can see why many accuse this episode of using this device, as Sisko and the Defiant get to Deep Space Nine and they see the minefield destroyed, which means hundreds of thousands of Dominion ships will instantly come pouring through the wormhole and overwhelm the Federation, spelling certain and immediate defeat. So it is seemingly a hopeless situation, and Sisko takes the Defiant into the wormhole, where he convinces the wormhole aliens to just make that fleet disappear and thus resolve the situation. And since the Bajorans look on the wormhole aliens as gods, this could be interpreted as a literal Deus Ex Machina, as literally God swooped in to resolve the situation. However, while I can certainly see that point of view, I don't entirely agree, and ultimately I don't think it's sloppy writing or Deus Ex Machina in the traditional sense. The main reason being is Deus Ex Machina typically refers to something that just comes out of nowhere to save the day, something that there was no build up to whatsoever, or very little build up to, and just all of a sudden it's there to save the day. The most classic example of this is the giant eagles in The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, as they always just turn up out of nowhere to save the day in a very convenient way that's convenient for the plot. And I personally don't think the wormhole aliens intervention fits the bill here. Because the wormhole aliens were well established in DS9 lore as being aliens that live in the wormhole, and were equally established was that the Dominion fleet needed to travel through the wormhole in order to get to the Alpha Quadrant. So it's not like the wormhole aliens just came out of nowhere, they were always there, and the audience knew that they were always there. So the possibility that they could intervene always existed. In fact, I considered this possibility before I even watched this episode. Moreover, in recent years prior to this episode, even though it goes against how the wormhole aliens were originally established, recent episodes in season 4 and 5 had established the wormhole aliens as having a connection to Bajor and to Cisco in particular, and that they have invested interest in helping Bajor and Benjamin Sisko in particular. The biggest example of this is the 5th season episode Rapture, where Bajor is about to join the Federation, but Sisko receives visions from the prophets, one of them in which he sees a swarm of locusts that will consume Bajor if they join the Federation and will destroy it. So he prevents them from joining the Federation. In retrospect, the locusts were the Dominion, and if Bajor had joined the Federation, when the Dominion took over Deep Space Nine, they would have attacked and occupied Bajor as a Federation world. But since Bajor did not join the Federation, it was able to remain neutral and have a peace treaty with the Dominion. Thus, the prophets sent Sisko visions that saved Bajor. Therefore, there had already been an example of the wormhole aliens intervening on Bajor's behalf. So ultimately, had the wormhole aliens not intervened with the incoming Dominion fleet, that would have been out of character for the wormhole aliens, had they, because they have already been established as intervening on Sisko and Bajor's behalf. To the naked eye, the ending of this episode may appear to be Deus Ex Machina, but if you actually look at the setup and on the previous episodes of Deep Space Nine, you'll find that's not the case, because it's not like the writers wrote themselves into a corner and was just like, well, let's just have the gods resolve this. And more like they purposely set up a situation in which the wormhole aliens would have to intervene and thus bring them back into the main story, which is something they have clearly been setting up for. So rather than a quick and sloppy easy fix, it was a well-established setup in order to bring the wormhole aliens back into the main fold. So my rating for Sacrifice of Angels is a 10 the best. This was an amazing conclusion to an amazing storyline about the Dominion taking over the station, and in fact, Season 6 would have been much better had the entire season continued on this serialized fashion rather than reverting to its episodic nature after this episode. The whole episode was executed in a truly exciting way with some great character building moments, with an ending that had you on the edge of your seat the whole time, and ended with the satisfaction of seeing the greatest villain in Star Trek driven insane. So that's it for my review of Sacrifice of Angels. If there's an episode from any of the 5 Star Trek series you'd like me to review, just leave a comment below with the episode you'd like me to review, and I'll endeavor to do so. However, 1 request per person, please. And make sure you subscribe so you can keep up with all that, and thanks a lot for watching.